Welcome to Lit Happens, Unpacking Senior English. I'm Adriel.
And I'm Belle.
We're experienced English teachers dedicated to supporting both new and experienced educators in a world in which we are often time poor, to empower our students to excel in their English studies.
If you're an English teacher, like us, navigating this curriculum, then this podcast is designed with you in mind. And our mission really is to break down the complexities by unpacking English nationally.
Well, welcome everyone to Lit Happens episode 32. And today we're going to be talking about our advanced English textual combinations for the new HSC. Joining me today is Belle. How are you going, Belle?
Hi, everyone. Well, thanks. How are you, Adriel?
I'm good, thank you. Excited to pick your brain today as to, the hard work you've been doing with these textual combinations. And I'm sure our listeners are going to have a great time listening to your insight. I think it's going to be awesome today. So we'll start off with our little quip for today. And our first question, our little quip for today is: Shakespeare's tragedies are more powerful than his comedies. Is that lit or quit? What do you think?
Oh, that's a really good question. I personally love reading Shakespeare, teaching Shakespeare, so I don't really mind. I'll take a tragedy, take a comedy, no problem. I will say, I think in the last few years, I've definitely been enjoying the comedies and finding a lot more nuance in them than I used to. So just to be, I think, a little bit different, I'm going to lean on that I actually probably prefer the comedies at the moment in teaching them for their nuance of ideas.
Fair enough. And my preference is the tragedies. I think they are still more powerful. When you talk with my students in particular, they don't seem to recall the comedies too much. They like the way tragedies end, which is a bit morbid, I think. But look, I think there's a lot of power. I think some of my favorite Shakespearean texts are things like the other texts like Othello, Macbeth, Hamlet. These are the texts that just have this endearing quality to them, and especially because they sort of follow that process of, I guess, even like those darker sides of humanity. He touches on some of these things, like why do we follow things like ambition, or why are we consumed by jealousy? And I think these tragedies do seem to unpack them quite powerfully. I think for me, the Shakespearean tragedies are a lot more powerful in nature. But again, in teaching The Merchant of Venice recently, as we have matured and gotten older and appreciated his comedies a bit more, you can understand why something like The Merchant is such a powerful, multi-layered text, which has in those endearing qualities that go or fall in line with comedies being powerful.
Because it falls in line with that tragicomedy, and so that I really love Merchant of Venice. I love The Tempest. I love Twelfth Night. I think that there's a lot of relatability in those texts, and there's still facets of human impact, but maybe as well, like my penchant for rom-coms kind of plays into that. So I'm very partial to the Shakespeare comedies, I think, because I love the romance storyline as well. Maybe that's where that's falling into line.
Fair enough. Look, it's funny, we've had a few sort of differences in terms of the little quits over the last few weeks, and it just shows you the widespread, I guess, of the English subject and the way we approach it. So that's fantastic. We'll be loving or wanting to hear more from our listeners as well. Let us know in the comments what you guys think. But yeah, before we sort of babble on too much, which I'm prone to do, let's go into our first question for today. And we are going to look at the new text and the combinations for advanced English. So how can teachers select E11 text to align with the new syllabus emphasis on diversity and all modes of engagement, and preparing for the Year 12 prescribed texts?
Yeah, good question. Good place to start with. Last week in our episode, we did a bit of an overview with the courses, and we did talk a little bit more deeply about the diversity of texts and the modes emphasized. So definitely, guys, if you haven't had a listen, go back to that one first. But the focus is on quality literature because there are no prescribed texts for Year 11. So this is where schools really have the power to pick specific texts and combinations that work and align with what they're going to do in year 11, because I think that's the best way to consider it. Year 11 is the practice ground, the breeding ground. It's the place to do the context that you need to sort, the text types that you're going to be using, and the types of assessments and skills that you're going to be assessing. So while there's no prescribed text, there is that focus on quality literature, and the quality literature should hit a range of diverse texts. So it does say try and have some Australian, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander text, some text representing, cultural or social or gender diversity, and also making sure that the text types are represented. So you do have to have a prose, a drama, poetry, and incorporating nonfiction and film somewhere in there will be really helpful as well, because we will talk more about this, but those text types are what are included or specified within the HSC syllabus. So you want to backward map so that you're preparing your guys with the types of forms and features that they're going to be exposed to. It's also a great opportunity to introduce them to different text types, even if you start introducing related texts in terms of practicing those short answer skills that they're going to need eventually. And also in terms of the modes, you want to be integrating the different modes. So those are your reading, your writing, your listening, speaking, your viewing, representing. I'm a really big fan of backward mapping from assessment and skills. So I think a good idea would be, if you've got your 3 terms worth of work, that you've got reading to write, and then the module A, which is narratives that shape our world, that is usually the comparative approach. And then you've also got your module B, critical study. So, try and just, I think, strategize and make sure you've got those different diverse texts across the 3. Then make sure you're representing the different text types across the 3. So you'd have a prose somewhere, have a drama somewhere, Shakespearean play, perhaps have your poetry somewhere, maybe incorporate some short films or other nonfiction text types. That will also depend on what you've picked for year 12. So, if you're doing a novel in module B, you might like to do a module in module B, novel in year 11 as well. But look, you and I both know it depends as well. Depends on the cohort. Sometimes you can't have it completely in sync, but as long as you're representing all of those, and then I think really making sure your assessments have the different modes, I think that's going to help. So making sure there's a reading and writing, some sort of listening and speaking, and a viewing representing. I think we can be very liberal with how we use those in year 11. So I know in the new syllabus now, there's no specification that you must do multimodal, which will be a lot of relief for some people. But maybe a multimodal component in year 11 might be a way for you to hit all those modes. So that's good to think about too. And then overall, you're looking at the rationale of the syllabus, which is how texts shape our values, how they shape our identities, cultural perspectives. It's all about the critical thinking and the critical analysis. So, the texts which mirror what you're going to do in year 12, I think is helpful here. Making sure that you've represented the ATSI text somewhere within your year 11 approach. Representing all the modes. And I think also seeing that you've got that aesthetic quality across your 3 texts, especially because this is advanced. So I think if you start with those really rich higher order texts, you can use that as the opportunity to upskill the students that, maybe are still exposing themselves to that really quality literature.
No, that's fantastic, Bill. And I love the fact that, you're prioritizing some of those texts with the quality language. You really want to build off of your year 12 texts, which are going to be rich in those language and structure and quality and all those sorts of things. So look, lots of things to consider, and you've unpacked that quite well. Let's jump into our second question now, which is sort of a bit of a lead on from a follow-on question from what we've just unpacked there. Question 2 here is, how should teachers choose year 12 prescribed text from the 2027-28 prescriptions for advanced, including the mandatory Shakespeare requirements? So we've just spoken about the 11 texts, and we've sort of spoken about the backward mapping, but Yeah, what's some sort of strategies for teachers to sort of select those Year 12 prescribed texts, considering what we've just
Yeah.
spoken about?
No, that's great. So you definitely, so Shakespeare is a must. If you have looked at the prescriptions, there's two Shakespeare texts in Mod B and two Shakespeare texts as part of Mod A. So you pretty much only have those to pick with. There isn't a Shakespeare in common like there used to be with Merchant. That's now moved into extension, I believe. So I think first and foremost, that's going to influence what you pick, because you must do a Shakespeare, and then where you pick it, whether it's module B or module A, will then determine the rest of your pattern. Because in the advanced course, you must have 4 prescribed texts and at least one from these 3 categories. So at least 1 prose fiction, at least 1 poetry, at least 1 drama, nonfiction, or media. So obviously, depending on what you pick, you might double up, and we can talk about that shortly as well. But I think also the key difference is there's no longer a set prescribed text for Module C. So, yeah, where we used to maybe use Module C to hit some of these features, you're solely looking at Common, Module A, and Module B for this one. So should we maybe talk in this question a little bit about the text choices maybe?
Yeah, I think so. I think so.
Yeah?
So
Okay.
what are some of those
All right.
text choices? And it'd be good to sort of see your combinations, I think, for teachers to sort of look at if they are planning.
Yeah. So if you are choosing Shakespeare in Module B, which is either your Othello or your Henry, and I think Othello is going to be super popular because I think a lot of schools obviously don't have a lot of time to program, and most schools would have maybe taught Othello in the prelim course perhaps, and so it might be a natural thing to go, I already have kind of a lot of resources, I'll just reprogram it a bit more according to Mod B for Year 12. And so I think that will be a popular choice. So anyway, if you end up doing that in Mod B, that is your drama done. And then you know that you must then have poetry and prose across Mod A and B. So some across Mod A and Common, sorry. So some of the combinations then might look like this. You might then in Module A do prose fiction with poetry because you're already doing drama in Mod B. Yeah, so if you're doing that, that could be like Bush Studies with Inside My Mother, Blake's poetry with the prose fiction drive. You can see that like I've shortened everything because they're really wordy. This year's prescriptions. All the texts have like big names. I'm already thinking about all the abbreviations that we're going to start seeing in essays and stuff, you know. Yeah. So if you do that, if you end up going the prose fiction and poetry in Mod A with either Henry or Othello in Mod B, then you pretty much can choose, anything there from Common because you've hit drama, poetry, and prose fiction. So you could go like the prose fiction route in Common. You might do, I think the imaginary, just blanked on it, Malouf's text, Imaginary World. That one's a really, I think, popular choice from what I've heard. You might go poetry. So I think Harwood's poetry will be really popular for advanced cohorts here. Yeah. Question 7 is a nonfiction text that I think if you've got really strong classes, you might be able to get really nuanced ideas out of that. That's one option. Or if you did like the poetry with film in Mod A, that's your Keats and Bright Star, then you're going to have to go prose fiction in the Common there. If you end up going poetry with drama in the Mod A, your Hamlet and Dickinson, again, you have to do prose in the Common module. And then lastly, if you end up doing Dalloway and the Hours, then you must do poetry in Common to hit that. So I think those two will be probably less common. I really feel like from what I'm hearing from schools and other colleagues, the combination with like Blake's poetry or perhaps Keats and Bright Star is really common. Imaginary Life, I'm hearing, is going to be quite popular. Yeah, so that's if you're doing Mod B and Shakespeare in Mod B, sorry. Now, if you're doing Shakespeare in Module A, there's a bit more nuance here as well. So let's say that you've picked in Mod A, if you go Julius Caesar with the Prince, I actually feel like this could potentially be a really, really popular choice for
Yeah.
like your select schools, perhaps your male selective schools.
Mm,
Because
mm.
from what I know, there are quite a lot of them that teach a similar combination in their prelim course.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, like Caesar's pretty popular there. So I feel like that could be it. So if you do it there with mod A, then some of the combinations might be then you might go and do prose then in module B, which would be like your Pride and Prejudice or your Warlight from Ondaatje. Or potential, and in your common you might be doing the poetry there, so perhaps Harwood. Or the other option would be if you did the prose in common to go with Julius Caesar, you'd pick the prose text, like imaginary life, or you might actually go with the module B, W.B. Yeats or Louise Gluck poetry. So that's if you do Caesar. And then we've got one more combo there. So you can see how, I guess what I'm trying to show is like what you pick in terms of Shakespeare really then defines your options across the board.
Yeah. It dictates.
Yeah, definitely. And the last one I think is going to be possibly less popular because there's more limited combinations here. Is if you did Hamlet and Dickinson in module A, because then you've covered drama and poetry. So then you might be looking at doing either module B prose fiction or prose fiction in the common, or swapping that over. So you can see how what you pick in the Shakespeare potentially might limit your choices there. What are your thoughts on those selections?
I think one of the key things that you mentioned there is just in the current sort of climate of teaching, just be mindful of what you already have. We discussed this last episode as well. What you already have in your resources, like you don't want to be recreating the wheel. Obviously, time is going to be a big factor, and I do agree with you. I think the third option there will probably be the least popular. I don't see that sort of happening, and I can see a lot of it happening with mod B being the critical study, choosing the Shakespearean text. I think it's a rich text which you can definitely unpack, and then you can sort of align that with your E11 texts as well. I know previously we've done Othello in the prelim course, which is now obviously considered with the year 12 courses, but it's
That's right.
something
And
that
Henry has stayed on the list. So schools that have already been doing Henry might just keep doing Henry for that very reason. Yeah.
Exactly. We're all about the business of working smarter,
Yes.
with elements
Yes,
of
we are.
working hard. I'm not saying don't work hard, but
No.
it's very busy. You guys are very busy. I mean, like I know for us at the
Yeah.
moment, we've just spoken about it. We've had HSC trials just off the back of our last
Yes.
series, and everyone's going to be head down marking, and
Yeah.
before you know
Getting
it,
that
we're
big
going
feat.
to before you know it, we're going to be at the end of the term, and we'll be like, all right, what time have we spent in actually programming for next year's course? And
Yeah.
this is where being smart with your choices. I think it's important
absolutely.
as well. But look, Belle, you've unpacked that quite well for us, and I'm sure you're going to pop up a little visual for us later on down the track, maybe in our
Yeah,
YouTube
definitely.
shorts. And people will be able to have a better look as to the genius of your mind there in unpacking this sort of stuff. So we'd love that. But before we go, we've got a few last minute questions here, like just quick fire
Sure.
questions that we can just quickly glance over for our listeners. And they sort of all culminate to be very similar. But our third question for today is, how can teachers integrate some of those E11 text choices with the modules to build foundational skills? And I guess the importance here is those foundational skills for the Year 12 prescribed texts, which you have already covered to a little bit of an extent. So you might highlight that a little bit more.
Yeah, definitely. So I think the important thing is you want your reading to write course to act a bit like your common module and your module C. So I know that can sound like quite a lot of things to cover, but if your reading to write has, a sort of driving thematic idea or something like that to anchor, like I know ones I've heard across the board are like diversity, transformation, like this is what I've heard from other schools. So I think if you do something like that with reading to write in year 11, that gives you an opportunity to do short answer like skills and unseen kind of or even related texts. And it also in that one gives you an opportunity to do some analysis, do a bit of a common module essay, but also usually in reading to write, the focus of the assessment there is a creative response or some sort of imaginative response. So you're therefore mimicking some of the module C skills in there. So this depends on whether you want to work more on the skills in year 11 or more so on correlating text types. Because if you've then decided to do, a prose fiction text in your common module, maybe that's where you also do a bit of a prose fiction with a couple of related texts within that. Yeah, if you're doing poetry in your common module, for example, maybe you want to do common poetry in that reading to write. Sorry. So I think for that, I think that opening one, there is quite a lot to do there. But for me, reading to write is more about exposure. I don't really worry if it doesn't get executed brilliantly. For me, I'd rather expose these kids to those three things: related text, a core text, and creative and analytical writing, and expose them to that so that when I do start common module in term 4, I've got that to bounce back off of. And so usually the assessment task, although I think we'll talk about that more in the next question, but usually if my assessment is creative there, I'm sort of hitting multiple birds with one stone, because year 11 is only 3 terms. When I then get into term 2, I think the thing for that narratives that shape our world, that's, the intertextuality and elements and appropriation. So for me in that one, I want to make sure students understand that textual concept, because that's going to then govern, what they actually do analysis-wise, particularly in the module A for HSC. So for me, that one's all about intertextuality. If I'm doing my Shakespeare in Mod A, then perhaps I'm doing my Shakespeare in year 11 Mod A as well with something. Or perhaps if I'm doing, poetry and film in that section in year 12, then I'm going to try and find, some sort of appropriation or at least an intertextual link between poetry and film. I think it's good there to also be able to introduce some of the context as well. So for me in the advanced course, I'm trying to show the text types, but I'm also trying to cover the different contexts that I think is going to be really important. If I can find a text that has similar context, I'll pop it in there. If I can't find the exact same context, I just work on the textual concept of context and then hopefully build the skill that way. So then lastly, when we're getting into that critical, sorry, what we're going to say?
No. I think it's important to actually look at some of those textual concepts, as Nessa has been prescribing quite a bit of it, and they've got a big framework around the textual concepts. So it's definitely like a good building block for our teachers to consider moving forward as well. We're basing a lot of those strategies in terms of planning around these concepts. So it's good that you've mentioned that for our listeners.
Yeah. And then I think just lastly for this question, in term 3, when they're doing the critical study, I like to, in year 11, start introducing critical approaches and maybe a basic understanding of literary criticism, just to start, and really encouraging that open interpretation of whatever my module B text is, to start allowing students to develop personal voice, which I think is huge for module B, because they can virtually respond however they want to a module B text. It doesn't have that exact same, line as the human experience, for example. So, so I think that's something else there.
Yeah, cool. No, thank you for unpacking that. That's quite thorough. And as you did sort of allude to, we're moving on to assessments now. With question 4 here. So how can teachers align some of those selected texts with the assessment tasks to target those band 5 and 6 performance descriptors?
Yeah, that's a good question. So from last week's episode, go back there, because you'll know that we talked a lot more about the assessment requirements and like the percentages and stuff like that. So when you're looking at that prelim year, it was a bit more flexible with the specifics. But what you might like to do then is look at the year 12 HSC assessment guidelines with that one. So let me just get my stats out in front of me. So with this one, it has to have a formal examination. You must have a craft of writing assessment, but it's also got a bit of a range this time, 20 to 30%, and then a weighting of 10 to 40%. Now, I know that because prelim is only 3 terms, you might be doing more of a 30, 40. Last week we talked about that, didn't we, Adriel? Where usually the 40 is like the exam, the prelim exam. Yeah. So what I think works well is if you correlate the skills in the module that they're going to have to do for the year 12 assessment and then try and mimic that in year 11. So like I said, we know that reading to write is usually a creative response. So I might mimic that a bit with what my craft of writing module C task is going to be in 12 and make that alignment. And then I would still do informal, like I would still do a class essay response and stuff like that. But I think you could build it that way. And then obviously, usually most schools are the formal examination. It's the trial exam. So I might be thinking about how I might mimic that in the prelim. So what might I do then in the prelim to try and hit those variety of things they're going to do in trial? So then I would say probably some sort of unseen short answer, definitely some sort of essay extended response, and definitely something that's like mod C creative-esque. And then that way you've sort of, covered those bases. And then I think as well, not having the emphasis on multimodal is going to be a bit of a game changer for everyone. Because then they might just decide in, like, let's say whenever they're term 2 or module B or whatever, they can just focus. Maybe that is where they do more of an analytical response. You might give them the question, but also give time conditions with the scaffold. I think now that we don't have to do the multimodal, we probably, I feel like I would really be focusing on those on the spot skills, because that's what's really going to be that culmination in the HSC. So I think when you're looking at assessment, I would try to mimic the type of assessment, the skills, and try and somewhat correlate the percentage marks, because that way you know that your guys in year 11 prelim have given it all a good crack, and that will also inform you if you need to change anything for year 12. I was, talking to a colleague. I was talking to a colleague, friend of mine, and we were saying, with the new specifications on assessment, schools, maybe real English faculties, I should say, really might feel the need to get the percentage and the weighing correct, and there's a bit of a, you've got to, so I think you might have to be strategic here, and the section that your students perform better at, that might be the more higher weighted task, and the section that you know what I mean? So I think because there's a lot more flexibility now, I think a lot of schools will be trying to be strategic and making sure that those weightings hopefully work in the best interest of that cohort. And that might change. We only know when you try. First year is always like that. First year of a new syllabus, Adriel, like we've been through it a couple of times. It's always, you got to wait and see. It's a bit hard that cohort has to be the guinea pig, but it's a bit of the nature of it, I think.
I think you mentioned quite a few good things, especially we covered this last week in terms of the multimodal task now not being compulsory. I think it is a big game changer, especially when we that have taught the senior course for a few years now, understand, students just were rushing through the course a lot, and to fit in that multimodal presentation was often a big task. Now we can actually truly focus on their critical writing in that Mod B unit in particular for advanced English, and I think that will go such a long way when it comes to the examination, because they are writing, let's be honest, 3 critical essays in the final HSC sort of response. So just be mindful of that, like, practicing writing, those higher leverage strategies that you are sort of implementing in your own planning, gear them towards your critical writing as well. That's one of my pieces of advice from just seeing the quality of writing from our students in the recent years. So that's good things that you brought up there. And remember, at the end of the day, it is a written examination which they're sitting in the HSC. So as much as we want to be all creative and all this and that, it's just, they are going to be writing under time conditions. So I guess that's my little piece of advice
Yeah,
there in the planning
very fair.
stages for listeners here. Anyway, before we again rumble on a
Next
bit
one.
more, let's go to our
Yeah,
question 5 here. Our final
sure.
question. What are some practical strategies which teachers can use? I apologize for the typo there. To plan and sequence textual options within a scope and sequence framework for the 2026 implementation. So a bit of
Yeah,
the
perfect.
implementation timeline recap here.
Yeah. So the first thing is to make sure that whatever your choices are in year 12 align with the NESA rules and regulations. That's a big thing. So obviously that's your first step. Then you would backward map. So you might see what you're already doing in year 11. And if you might have gotten lucky and some of your texts have remained the same in the year 12 new HSC course. I know a couple of schools, like people who work at schools where maybe one or two of their texts is still there. I also know schools where like none of the texts are there anymore. So that's its own problem in itself. But once you make that decision and then work out what you're doing in year 11, that's crucial. First step is what's year 12, backward map to year 11. Now, if you do have to go online. I am trying to put together some resources to hopefully help you guys. But when you are considering scope and sequence, you also have to look at with those new text selections, the new syllabus. And so we talked about this in last week's episode too, Adriel, but for advanced English, the new syllabus has specific kind of outcome content points within each module. So if I'm scope and sequencing, backward mapping, I'm looking at all that and how it correlates, and then I'm backward mapping that into year 11 as well. So as I said, there are specific ones for the prelim modules and rubrics and also ones for the HSC. So I'm making sure that they're in my scope and sequence and that my assessment tasks hit those specific content points. So that will really encourage correlation there. The other thing to think about as well, probably with the scope and sequence, is where you're going to be teaching those texts. So if you've got your more dense texts, you might be choosing them to do in terms where there's maybe less interruption, or you're not featuring trial exams and things like that. So being really conscious of the time of where things go. And then also I think when you start programming, you need to, I think, with your own faculty, make sure you're all kind of in agreement of where that course is going. Because I find sometimes there's disconnect with the year 11 one and the year 12 one, where you're kind of teaching what you like and what you already have, which completely understand. Like we've all done it. I've done it. But I think if you want to hit the ground running with this new course, you need to be really kind of pedantic about what you're doing in year 11, mimics what you're doing year 12, practical strategies. I would create a big scope and sequence for the term. I would make sure my outcomes are all mapped and my assessments and my weightings are mapped. Then I would go into each of my units and look at what the content is for year 12 and the content for year 11, and make sure that my activities in year 11 in my teaching and learning sequence are building the skills that's going to be necessary to get to those outcomes as well.
Yeah. That sounds good, Bill.
And so, I think as well, sorry, I was just going to say, you might actually try and lean on your colleagues. And so if you have colleagues in other schools where you guys happen to be teaching a very similar thing, you might, encourage a bit of sharing there and doing a bit of a swap. Obviously, each school will have to, integrate whatever they borrow into their own, unique context and circumstance. But I think the important thing is you have to know the syllabus and you have to know the outcomes to make sure that what you're teaching in those terms is going to hit that syllabus outcome, and therefore the skills are represented. I think teachers have to go back and read that, because it's not the same as it was with the previous prescriptions.
Yeah, no, that's some good advice there. And I think there's some good things that you've given us to sort of go off and just implement. And then obviously we're going to be going through the next few weeks in terms of this implementation process, providing a few more resources online and just unpacking this in a bit more depth, I guess, with certain things. But look, thank you so much for today. I think it's been an awesome
Ooh,
time in terms of.
can I say
Oh,
one
yeah,
more
you want?
thing?
Yeah, one more thing. Yeah.
Sorry, Joel. Can I say one more thing? Just because I realized I stumbled across it, you'll be familiar with this. In the new syllabus for the junior years, the department had this like phases approach to help you organize your teaching and learning. So like first phase was something like, I don't know, connecting. Then it's like engage with the text. It was like a bit of a process to get you to work through your actual outcomes and work through a teaching and learning sequence. I found one online that they have phases for the stage 6 as well. I will be posting some resources up so you guys can see it too. Yeah, but the phases actually, in terms of when you're actually getting into my teaching and learning, the phases, if you were to able to follow them and map them out, you'll see that they very much align with like what you would do in the first few weeks of the term, what you would do in the middle where you're in deep analysis, and then what you would do in the last 3-4 weeks when you're leading up to assessment tasks and kind of post-assessment activities as well. So that's really helpful, guys. You'll be able to find that on the education website as well.
Yeah, awesome. No, that sounds great. Great sort of last minute gold nugget there, I think, as well. And I'm sure
yeah,
we're going to be seeing this. But look, guys, thank you so much for listening again. We love your support. And thank you, Belle, once again for unpacking these textual combinations for advanced English.
Yeah, pleasure. Hope that was helpful.
Yeah, look, remember to like and
get the ball
subscribe,
rolling.
guys. Yeah, remember to like and subscribe, share the page. We've been getting a few more comments here on our socials here or there. But thank you once again, and we will see you guys next week.
Happy trial marking.